Welcome to the Politics Programme with me, George Hargreaves, and this week it's my pleasure to introduce my guests, Reverend Brian Robinson from the New Testament Church of God, David Lindsay, a counsellor from Kensington and Chelsea, and my good old friend Ron Holland, author, mentor for business people and financier. Welcome to the Politics Programme. And this week, as I'm always saying, a week in politics is a long time. This week, the man has been for turning when the lady was not. Cameron, if you remember, viewers, you'll remember we were on the show with the Right Honourable Stephen Timms talking about the veto back in December. And I said, and Stephen agreed with me, it didn't really sound like a veto. And it hasn't proven to be a veto, has it, David?
No, but technically you can only veto a treaty, George. But what Cameron has done has gone soft. I would like to see him have been much, much tougher. But then I'm a principled Eurosceptic in the ideally let's get out brigade.
Well, you're a businessman, Ron. What is this whole thing with Europe and the currency going to do for British business? Your clients that you mentor,
yep.
What's it going to do for them?
It's not going to do a lot. I mean, we've got to get some strong backbone into the situation, and at the moment, there's nobody really getting to grips with it. Nobody at all.
Well, is this this alliance within the EU, is this the answer? And has Cameron been correct to keep Britain out of it?
I think Cameron, in this instance, is correct, and I think he's playing his cards very close to his chest, and at the end of the day, I think it's going to take a bit of time before we get the picture. But
Angela Merkel said something that I found a little concerning about this idea of having a fiscal arrangement, to use the word, well, it was translated from the German, as eternal, and that each government would be tied to it. Does that not, David, go against our whole system of politics here, where no parliament is tied to the previous parliament?
I would completely agree, but I'm one of those who would like to see Britain have a policy closely involved with Europe, but not part of the European Union.
In terms of church and ministerial matters, you know, the Church of God, as it's known abroad, and New Testament Church, an international denomination. Do you, in the same way, have concerns about in or out of Europe, and particularly within the denomination?
Not quite the same in terms of the general laws, but one or two when it comes down to church polity, where we are one denomination in our particular instance, and you find that there's conflict of application because of European interpretations and things. But there are laws, even employment laws and that begin to impinge even upon workers, including voluntary workers, in the church context. So it does become an issue.
So European law is, you're finding, is actually impinging on some of the things that the church can and cannot do. Is that what you're saying? And
it has the potential. I can't point to a particular instance more in British employment law, but British employment laws are nonetheless influenced and to some measure being directed by the European law. So it's a circular thing, but it is impacting us.
So we already, though, don't we, Ron, have a situation where the City of London is already being controlled to a great deal by the European machine or the European Union. Yep. So is this not a bit of kind of smoke and daggers or cloak?
Smoke and mirrors.
That's the one I'm looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe some daggers as well.
No, and I'm sure the daggers are there, very much so.
Now, I want to just tell you, viewers, that this season we are taking text messages, we are taking emails. I think it's live@revelationtv.com. We want you to be more involved than you were last season, so send in your emails, comment. I'll read them out. They've given me a lovely iPad to read those out. So be involved with what we're talking about in the show today. We've been looking at David Cameron and his announcement about Europe, to which the Labour leader Ed Miliband says that Cameron's vetoes are not for life, they're just for Christmas. Was that something rather unfair?
Well, he can say that, but actually he was a part of a government that ceded more sovereignty, or put it slightly differently, surrendered more sovereignty than any other government that we've had. And in some cases that's saying quite a lot. Therefore, the moral and political authority for Ed Miliband to say that is negligible.
Talking of sovereignty, the Falklands, back in the news. Argentina seem to be itching to take the Falklands again.
Well, they can itch to want them. They clearly do want them. I don't dispute that. But they're British, and as far as I'm concerned, if the islanders want to remain British, they should have an unconditional veto on that.
Well, you've been a military man. Can you see this being another Falklands War, or is this just saber rattling?
I mean, ultimately, if they want to send signals, they will. They can saber rattle, as the expression is, and we've got to do whatever is necessary in terms of deploying ships, and we are sending one, and possibly rather more soldiers than we've got there at the moment, to deter and to show that we actually mean it, so that there will not be an invasion and we don't need to re-invade, because that's very questionable whether we could do that.
How's it going to affect business?
Well, I've got, funnily enough, a lot of clients in Scotland, and most of my clients are just focused on absolute survival at the moment. So they're not really thinking of politics or changes in policy. They're just absolutely heads down, trying to make things happen, trying to earn money, and the last thing they want is any changes in the regime. They're happy as it is, but they just want to start making money again.
So would they agree, do you think, with Margaret Curran, who says that most Scots would rather have partnership than create their biggest rival on their doorstep?
Yeah, no, absolutely, they would.
And
that's what I felt, that they'll be happy with partnership rather than we just want to be totally independent, because I think, as you were saying, the basic issue for the majority is an economic one rather than a true political one in terms of general population. I'm not talking about the politicians themselves, and I think that becomes the issue, their economic state of life and what is going to provide for that. And one could say, just like 57% have voted for moving into their independence, it's not too far from 50-50, so one could say, well, almost 50% have voted to remain as they are. And so it's a very thin expression at the moment.
But George, look at it in a slightly different way. Suppose Scotland were to decide to go independent, would a Scottish government in Edinburgh be willing to allow the Shetland Isles, for example, themselves to become independent of Scotland?
Or even join with Denmark.
Or London.
Or London, even. And isn't this whole question really about how badly the partnership, because England didn't conquer Scotland, as the Scots will want to point out to us. It was an act of union. Is this kind of like a marriage going on the rocks, rather than, and we need to counsel both sides to have forbearance with one another? Isn't that the problem, that they don't feel like partners, they feel like they've been subjected?
And I think there's been this long historical sense of competition anyway, and again, how much of that has been worked out into political thinking rather than an emotive desire to be, kind of a clan mentality. And so that marriage has always been rather unstable anyway.
Now, Alex Salmond has said that he would want to join the EU, Scotland in the EU. Does that not throw up one or two complications, certainly surrounding the euro, which, if they were going to go in at this stage, they'd probably have to join the euro? And the euro's in such a state. Yeah. Wouldn't that be absolutely disastrous?
It would be. And I don't think we need to join the euro at the moment. I think we just got to, if this was a business, we need to kind of focus on the knitting and get ourselves sorted out before we think of joining all the other problems that are across Europe. We've got to just stick with what we're doing, stick with the knitting.
How would that work if Scotland were in the euro and England and Wales and Ireland were not, Northern Ireland were not?
We would be clearly in uncharted territories, George. But I want to go back to what you said about Britain and Scotland, or England and Scotland, and the relationship. And there is undoubted resentment, and probably rightly perceived and felt on both sides. But years ago, and go back to the Act of Union and the Union of Crowns, one of the reasons why England and Scotland came together as a country, I seem to remember from history, was, quote, for the sake of the gospel, unquote. Mm-hmm. And if certain church leaders, those I would suggest who really do believe in this country, in England and in Scotland, were to come together and pray earnestly and seek God's face and acknowledge initially amongst themselves the shortcomings of both on a church level as well as on a national and state level, I would be very interested to see where that might lead.
Scotland was in fact known as the land of the book.
Was rather than is, I think, alas.
And Brian, is the breaking up, which is what they're talking about, of the United Kingdom, is that a judgment, do you think?
It might be a self-invoked judgment. I wouldn't think it, as a divine edict itself. But I think we bear the fruit of what we sow. And so we're probably arriving there because of our unwillingness to conform to what was the book that guided us in the first instance, even guided our politics.
And the Queen, how's that going to... So she would stop being Queen of Scotland, or...?
I doubt it.
It's... well, you'll have to watch this space. If you've got any views, please send in your emails. Let me check to see whether anybody has at this stage. This is new territory for me. Stuff is beginning to come in, and we'll turn to that a bit later in the... yeah, the Brits are wrong. United we stand, divided we fall. We are heading in the wrong direction. Eventually, a united Christian world is the answer. We are weakening ourselves and others by standing apart. After all, we are now already in the end times. Thank you, Chris, for that contribution. Keep the emails coming. We'll read out as many as we can.
And do you know what, George? We've been in the end times for the last 2,000 years.
Did you hear that, Chris? Moving swiftly ahead.
But I think he's right as well.
Moving swiftly ahead. We did mention this last week. We mentioned the House of Commons. They were debating the welfare bill. And now it's House of Lords, sorry, were debating the welfare bill. Now it's back in the Commons, having been defeated in the Lords on 7 occasions. Will the Commons listen? David?
Well, Cameron has a majority of 80 plus with the coalition, and I'm sure they will get it through. I think that if they take it as being a financial measure, the House of Lords will accept that, and even if not, they won't enjoy it, and it will become law.
Does that, Brian, make a nonsense of having the House of Lords? If the House of Lords are saying time and time and time and time again, actually you've got this wrong, and if what David is saying, Cameron can still just push it through in the way that he wants it. Does that kind of bring into question the whole purpose of having a revising House?
Well, it probably does. And there is a debate of, should we just abolish the House of Lords anyway? I'm not fostering that, but it really does bring into question the functional role. If it is there, it ought to be corrective, and it ought to be of a strong guidance.
One of the main things that have been of issue with the peers is the whole question that economically the United Kingdom isn't homogenous. It's not the same everywhere. So
yep.
If you do a sweeping, everybody's going to get 26 grand and nothing more. In one part of the country, that's fine. In another part, you're still in poverty. Is that an argument, as a businessman and entrepreneur, is that an argument that you think stands up from a social perspective?
No, I'm a great believer. I'm a capitalist. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm believing that if you start a business, you ought to be able to rise as high as you can, doing whatever it is you can. If you're delivering products and services, I believe you should be able to make your way to the top.
So 26 grand a year should be enough for anybody?
No, definitely not.
But in terms of a welfare cap,
yeah.
do you think...
Oh, okay, on the welfare cap, yeah.
Yeah. David, are you with your colleagues in the Conservative Party on this one?
£26,000 has been taken because it is, whether it's average or median earnings for a family, and I think it is reasonable to say that those people in receipt of benefits and welfare in excess of that should not get more than average earnings from their welfare.
The poor will be with us always, and a part of our Christian ethos is concern for the poor. We saw, in fact, in the debate last week that Lord Carey was standing against the five other bishops in the House. From a pastoral perspective, what's the answer? 26,000, a set rate across, or do we look at each individual case?
I think you perhaps do need, a barometer line, because you can't get practically to every individual case, but maybe there has to be some system within it where there are latitudes, written there for consideration, because there has got to be a concern, a concern for the poor and a concern to have a structure that is going to be conscious of them and cater toward them.
Your church is in Hackney, which for many years was very low on the Jarman scale, I think that it was, of deprivation. I think you used to jockey for position with Tower Hamlets. I think with the Olympics it's kind of gone up a little bit, but you see a lot of poverty around the area, Lower Clapton, and you've got the Pembury estate, I think, right on your doorstep.
Indeed,
Are those people right on your doorstep going to be able to survive on 26,000 a year?
Are they going to be able to earn that in the first place?
Isn't that a good point? If they can't earn £26,000 and they need to have that amount to live, is that not a salient point?
It is a salient point, absolutely. And I'd much rather see people, instead of getting government handouts, getting out there and earning the money and making it. If they can, get a business started, absolutely.
Well, I'm tempted to go into a place where I know you go in our hot topic, which we're coming to soon. It's easy, but I will say it's easier said than done, but I'll ask you to keep your powder dry until we've seen your film. Maybe that is a good point for me to bring in this week's hot topic. And as I've given the game away, Ron Holland, business mentor, entrepreneur, financier, has been our hot topic spokesman today, and his hot topic is bankers' bonuses. Let's hear what Ron had to say in this week's hot topic.
Hot topic.
Hello, my name's Ron G. Holland, and for the last 12 years I've run wealth.co.uk. As well as being the author of about 18 business books, I've helped entrepreneurs raise millions for their start-up companies, and we mentor people and help people get up and running in early stage and developing companies. And today's hot topic that I am very, very passionate about is bankers' bonuses. And as you can imagine, as a business mentor, I've got quite a bit to say about that. First, I want to say a big congratulations to Stephen Hester for not taking his £1 million bonus. The right decision, in my opinion, the only decision he could make, absolutely. It's outrageous that there's this £500 million bonus pot to be given out to people like John Hurricane, Ellen Olmany and Brian Hartzer, when there's my clients, people going out of business every day of the week because they can't get small overdrafts and loans. Now, I've been in 3 recessions during my lifetime, and it's absolutely ridiculous what's happening now. Things have to change. Things have to start doing differently. And it starts at a grassroots level. People need to start recognising the country's economy won't turn around until we start feeding the small and medium-sized businesses at a grassroots level. What they need is the lifeblood of business, which is a bit of capital, an overdraft or a loan, and a bit of financial help to kickstart them. People think, oh, big business is the cure, but it's not. Big business always starts from a small business. That is, acorns grow into oak trees. So we got to nurture those small businesses up and down the country, in every town, in every city. We've got to get our minds around what we can do to help small businesses. There's no no lack of entrepreneurial spirit out there. Every day I see new businesses come into this business alone. But unfortunately, as new businesses come in, other businesses are going out of businesses, not because they're bad people, wrong people, bad businesses. They just cannot get the financial support. Absolutely ridiculous. So there's a lot of changes that need to happen while we get our minds around supporting the lifeblood of the economy, which is small and early stage companies. So wealth.uk, I spend time mentoring people, writing books for people, helping them get businesses up and running. But we need much, much more support from the banking community to recognise what needs to be done with small businesses. More overdrafts, some of my clients can't even get bank accounts open. What's that all about? Absolutely ridiculous. You can't open a business bank account when the country's crying out to have business and things happen. So the banks have got to start changing, start opening up the doors, start giving out the loans, start getting the overdrafts going, start kick-starting the economy by making money. The only place you can make money is in business. That's what generates money. And there are thousands of entrepreneurs out there at the moment raring to go, start up their own little business, and some of these will go into big businesses pretty quickly. But that won't happen unless the banks get their mind around the overdrafts, the loans, helping, supporting them and nurturing them and holding their hands until they turn into something meaningful. We at wealth.co.uk, we're doing our bit. We need more help. We're putting that message out there as well, and we're passionate about it. We won't give up until we get there. We're going to do our bit helping turn the economy round. The banks have got to come on side and start being a bit pragmatic in their outlook, not being greedy, not taking all the money for themselves, start dishing it out at the grassroots level where it's really needed.
Hot topic.
Ron, not a hot topic, a sizzling topic.
You hit a hot nerve there with me.
Well, and you seem to have a hot nerve with the Queen and her people who give out and take away the honours.
Yeah.
Fred Goodwin.
Yeah.
Shredded,
Should have happened a long time ago.
Shredded
Yeah.
Fred.
Yeah, no,
That is
absolutely.
no longer Sir Fred Goodwin.
Yeah. Yep.
You think that should have happened a long time
Oh,
ago?
absolutely. You see, not only has he bought the kind of the banking community.
Before we go,
yeah?
let me just make sure the viewers know who we're talking about. So Mr. Fred Goodwin, who was the chief executive of Royal Bank of Scotland, was knighted for services to the banking industry, whilst under his auspices, the Royal Bank of Scotland ran into so much financial problems that we had to bail it out with taxpayers' money.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And you think that he shouldn't have his knighthood?
No, absolutely not. Not only has he brought the kind of the banking community to its knees, but brought the British economy to its knees. And every day I'm seeing, honestly, because I own wealth.co.uk, I'm getting hundreds of phone calls every day. I'm on the front page of Google, right? I'm above Financial Times, Barclays Bank, I'm right at the top. And I get hundreds of phone calls from people in tears. Ron, what am I going to do? I want to start a business, can't get a loan. Ron, I can't even open a bank account. And as I said on there, what's all that about? Can't open a bank account? They go in there, say, no, you don't pass the criteria. So how can you, if you can't open a bank account, how can you get your business up and running? It's frightening what's going on out there at the moment. And people with this £500 million pot, and my clients can't.
And that's just RBS, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Just RBS, that's the pot at RBS. There's £500 million pots all over the place, but nothing for my clients, nothing. And I'm talking about a £1,000 overdraft or a £20,000 overdraft. People can't get it, can't get overdrafts, can't get loans. It's a nightmare at the moment, right across the UK. And I'm fielding those calls every day of the week. So I am passionate about it. And my office is in a block that used to be owned by Alan Sugar. It's a huge office block and it's split up into hundreds of little units where people, and every day I'm seeing suddenly there's a business there, the next day it's gone out of business. So suddenly all of these rooms are empty, the next day they fill up again, then they all empty out. There are people going in and out of business all the time. And people don't realise this is being replicated right across the country. And it's because nobody's fuelling the businesses at a grassroots level.
Conservatives are in government. the Conservative, the party of business. What's going on here?
George, I think there's a systemic problem with the banks, that the banks enjoy lending large amounts of money to large organizations, and that historically has been the case. They have been less good, much less good, at lending more modest amounts to smaller companies. And although it could and should have happened under a Labour government 3 years ago, it wouldn't have been wrong for it to have happened under a Conservative government when they got in, setting up a new bank to be privatised in due course, specifically to lend modest amounts of money to SMEs.
Brilliant idea, absolutely.
But it's got to happen. And there are a number of businessmen and bankers with extensive experience there who would like to do it, but clearly it needs to be funded.
But Brian, we own 80-odd% of RBS. Why can't we do this wonderful idea with a bank that the taxpayer already owns a majority of? Doesn't that, we're not entrepreneurs, we're pastors. Let's have a pastoral. Doesn't that sound like common sense?
Well, it sounds like common sense. But I think, you know, this whole issue is, right now you're getting this knighthood taken away. Yes, that's the right thing that should be done. It's penal, it's making an example of someone.
But it puts him alongside Anthony Blunt, Ceausescu and Robert Mugabe.
Well, this is the point. And the question is this the answer? Is it adequate? So I'm not objecting to the taking of the knighthood. But I'm saying, what is that achieving? And I think there's something more fundamental that has got to be resolved. An anthropologist, philosopher, come theologian called René Girard, he has an interesting theory or model of what he calls a mimetic thing, where society looks for a scapegoat, in the sense that all of this comes through a jealousy of what another has. It comes to an act of violence or some breakdown in society, and then society is left with the problem. How do we unite again? How do we recongregate? Well, the best answer is to find a scapegoat, a victim, someone to blame. Then everybody can transfer their issues to that person and actually evade and overlook the endemic thing that has brought them there to their problem in the first place. And so how much is this mirroring again this societal thing where someone is made a scapegoat? Yes, everybody's saying, so what about the other people who need their knighthoods taking away? Is it just spreading this idea of scapegoating? Because then attention is drawn away from the real issue, the real problem, the issue of controls, the issue of regulations with the banking, etc., and with the making possibility of loans, etc. So I think something more than just knighthood withdrawals is what the real issue needs to be about.
And can I just come in here for a minute? I think you've got to face up to the fact the real issue is one thing. If a country has an economic problem, like we obviously do, the only way you can kickstart that out of it is to get business booted up, and that's the core issue, the core problem, and that is what's not happening. That is the problem in Greece. It's ever so difficult in Greece because they haven't got the infrastructure that we've got to get business up and running. It's a totally different problem, but here we've got a massive infrastructure. We've got a willing population ready to create wealth through business. That's the only place wealth comes from, nowhere else. There is no other place. You can only create money by creating business, and the banks are stopping that business happen. Absolutely, that is the core problem. And with that capital injected into lots and lots of businesses, those green shoots would start shooting up again and things would start turning around.
I want to say, George, first of all, I think it would have been good and right if there were a procedure for having stripped Fred Goodwin of his knighthood, and that principle could and should be extended to many others, including the former chairman of the American Fed, Alan Greenspan, who was probably much more responsible than Greenspan for the world economics mess at the moment. But there are 2 points I want to make as well. First of all, we haven't used the word mammon. Much of the problem that we are seeing at the moment is because of our love of mammon, and as a nation, and probably actually as a church, we love mammon far more than we should. Jesus said, you cannot serve God and mammon. And actually, I don't think God has a problem in the world serving mammon, because he expects that. But I think he does have a problem with the church serving mammon. And I think it was interesting last week that for the first time, Britain had acknowledged debt of £1 trillion.
You mentioned
That is
on
a
the show.
staggering amount. And nobody has acknowledged that, nobody in a sense spiritually has acknowledged the sheer significance of what that means spiritually as well as financially. We cannot go on spending far, far more than we've been earning, as we have been for not a few years, but actually for a few generations. And it will take a few generations to put right.
But don't we have a senior churchman in government at the moment? Or certainly in the House of Lords, an ordained Anglican minister.
You're quite right. Stephen Green, the former chairman of HSBC, is responsible for trade, and he is a good and able man. He happens actually to go to the church to which I go. But one man alone cannot turn things around.
But his portfolio is trade. So
it is trade, yeah.
So has he been speaking out as an experienced banker in this situation to even get these kind of ideas? Maybe we should invite Stephen onto the show and ask him firsthand and not have you as his surrogate. But
all I know is that he has made some very good observations and speeches as and when he was chairman of HSBC, and he did not in his final year take any bonus, despite the fact that he had certainly earned it, and HSBC was not in the same problems, and indeed is not owned in any respect by the British government.
I'd like just to come in here because I think you've got a good point there, but I want to talk about my clients and my customers, and I don't see them serving mammon. I see the bankers doing that, because what they're doing is dishing out money and making massive inordinate amounts of money, bonuses from usury, from that money.
Yeah.
Now, my clients at the grassroots level, people turning over maybe 50 or 100 grand and not claiming the dole or government benefits because they're in business of their own, that's not serving mammon, that's serving the community. And that's a big difference. So there's a big difference between the entrepreneurial spirit, not sponging off the government, but earning, making business, making money, putting food on the table, looking after their families. There's a difference between those people there and the people in the banks with these £500 million pots. And what really and truly, they're just dishing out money and taking a big percentage off of the top for themselves. And I don't call that that's serving mammon. I don't call the small businessman serving mammon. I really don't.
I certainly think that there's a very strong case to be made for some heavyweight Christian economists looking at the principle of making money out of money.
Ooh.
And all that entails.
And
well, Jesus was not against bankers,
No,
was
he
he?
wasn't against bankers, but I think the principle going back through looking at the Old Testament as well as the New, of making money out of money, is something that we as Christians need to be very careful about.
And that was exactly my point. Absolutely. And I like to see people in business making money rather than sponging off of the state, and I think that's totally different.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
So you're saying rather, you want to see money made from making products, giving services, rather than just money, as you say. Is that what you mean when you say?
I do have a question on spiritual and biblical grounds, as well as actually the accounting and the financial grounds, on all the derivatives and so on that have been created, the complexity of which is mind-boggling, and as far as I can see, the downside of which is huge.
I think that's what I wanted to say, is that, you know, I mean, Old Testament, New Testament thinking on finance nowhere denigrates accumulating wealth. In fact, much of the mission of the early church was dependent upon having wealthy people with generosity within its ranks. But I think that the paradigm is always presented that money is there to be of service. So I think it's serving mammon when it's just collecting for one's own deposit at the ignoring of the plight of those around, I don't think it is saying, okay, the rich should necessarily take care of the poor and the poor shouldn't have to worry and just become dependent, but it is saying that the Christian idea of generating wealth is generating it out of a motive and with an objective that it can be replenishing beyond simply personal gain. And I think that's where a Christian ethic really comes in.
But to complain about the bonuses, is that not akin to complaining about the wages of the other guy? You remember Jesus gave the account of the workers who came at the 11th hour. They had one deal, and the guys who came at the beginning of the day felt it was unfair. Isn't that a bit what your philosopher is saying? And David,
but I would say, that's why I would slightly disagree, that actually we've all got to accept the amount that we're paid for, because, okay, mammon, move away from mammon. Paul tells us in his letter to Timothy that it is the love of money that is the root of all kinds of evil. So we need to be very careful that although somebody earns 3 or 4 or 10 times as much as us, that we are not becoming envious in our hearts because of that.
So we shouldn't mind that Sir Fred, although he has, so I keep calling him Sir Fred.
Stop doing that.
No, Mr. Godwin has lost his knighthood, but he's not lost his £650,000 a year for life pension.
But that's why I said at the moment, rescinding his knighthood, it's said to be, we're making an example. When the question asks, well, why have you waited so long? The answer is, well, you have to start somewhere. Is it going to go to others? Not certain. But the point is, if it is just making an example by taking away, you know, the title, but it is not taking away the money over which the title has been brought in question, then, you know, what kind of an example is it? And therefore, are we going back to this this other thing, you know, of Girard, that, you know, are we just looking for a scapegoat? And if we say we've made an example, then let everybody be silent and happy and content, rather than go and fix the real issue. So I think the issue of, you know, how much one person is earning and even how much a person's bonuses might be, I think it's got to be viewed proportionately. It might be exorbitant to my income range, but it might not be disproportionate to another person's income range. But I think that the proportionality has got to be proportional within the precincts and the area where that is being earned, and is it ethical in that context?
But George, I mean, I'll just say that, am I envious of Fred Goodwin's pension? No. Would I like to be in receipt of that so I could give it away? Yes. But do I think that his pension, particularly in the circumstances of the demise of the Royal Bank of Scotland, is exorbitant? Yes, I do.
Do you think, okay, I mentioned Blunt, Anthony Blunt, he was a Russian spy.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a criminal thing to be. There are many who would say that Robert Mugabe is an international criminal for what he's doing in his own country, and Ceausescu the same. Do you think that Goodwin is a criminal? And is what he's done of criminal proportion, for which perhaps the punishment would be you're fined £650,000 a year, which happens to be the amount of your pension, for the rest of your life?
Well, first of all, I don't think that he's been found guilty of anything in a criminal court. So by that criteria, he's not. I would not be in favour of fining him £650,000 a year, because then he would have to be maintained by the state.
Do you think he's not got other income?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, come on, do me a favour.
But clearly, one could accuse the Remuneration Committee, as and when he was in charge, of woefully overpaying, or not woefully, of hugely overpaying him. But that observation applies to most of the banks and most of the city. And I think one observation to be made is that in times gone by, there were quite good salaries paid to people in the city, and in a good year they got a good bonus. But now a bonus is guaranteed every year, no matter how good or how bad the results are.
Performance.
And no matter how good or bad they are. And a second thing, a technical thing, bonuses are paid on, or often calculated based on equity rather than on assets, which makes it much easier to get a large bonus.
I wanted to bring in a few of our viewers. Susan says, it's not just the banks that are worthy of censure. What about Companies House in Cardiff? There's definitely room for improvement in the service they offer. Problem is that I'm in England. I cannot try the other offices to see if they're any better. No competition, so no desire to improve the service they offer. Using their services cannot be avoided either if businesses are going to be created, maintain the legal structure they need in order to thrive. Ron, are your clients finding problems with Companies House?
To be honest with you, that is not a big problem as far as my clients are going to go. I'm sure it is a problem, but it's not something that comes up every day like the banking situation does. Every day I get calls, can't get a bank account, can't get an overdraft, can't get a loan, but not I've got problems with Companies House. So that is very, I'm sure this person here might have problems, but it's not something I come across on a regular basis.
We have Mark Taylor from Coventry saying, debt, bang on. We have lost control, a respect for each other, and an ability to say, I may want this, but I can't have it. Sorry, guys, but I don't have much respect for many in the banking community. There are some individuals who need to reflect, nay, repent on what they have done. We need a government who takes these guys on. The current government seems more interested in introducing a benefits cap rather than claw back the billions squandered by some within the financial community who have kept the profit at the expense of those on lower income. David, is this a fair charge against your colleagues in the Commons?
I want to concentrate on one word that he said, repent. My own view is that we are in a very, very precarious situation in this country. And we need to repent big time. And that means those Christians, whether they be bankers or civil servants, particularly politicians, and most of all clergy, need to repent for having, in our different ways, failed God. And then let's see where the Holy Spirit may lead us.
Interesting. Let's see where the Holy Spirit may lead us. Somebody just, I think it's a corrective on us speaking about taxpayers. Note the tax is paid by all. Speaking of the taxpayer in the singular is a deception to make people think that they don't have a stake in society. God bless Pat. Thank you for your blessing, Pat. And it's a good point. You know, it's not one Mr. Taxpayer, it's all of us, isn't it? It's all of us little by little paying our share. And I want to ask you, since all of us are in some way shareholders in RBS, why isn't it that the largest shareholder in RBS cannot make the board change some stuff and change it now?
Well, it's an interesting point, and I believe that platforms like this and making your voice, our voice heard definitely gets the word out there. And I do think it's an educational process. And I think the more you talk about it and more you voice your opinion, you can sway things.
But George, there's another reason as well, and that is that ultimately the problems were caused by a bad culture. And that goes back to the problem of man's heart. And it is a long and time-consuming process to change it.
A change of heart will change the country. Ryan?
Well, I think at least from a church perspective, a change of heart can prompt toward a change in the country. And I think if we are going to be honest as Christians, we have to re-examine our own comments about the value of money and the accruement of money, because the way we have promoted a prosperity mentality as an entitlement and a divine endowment that all must get, and even to the point that if you don't have those levels of prosperity, maybe there's something lacking in your own spirituality. Have we not begun to cultivate an unbiblical and an unchristian, in true charitable terms, concept of money, so that we are ourselves seeking only for ourselves rather than one another, and that this, I wouldn't say the church has generated this demise in society, but we are certainly not being the light and alternative voice. Again, not to say the Christian cannot be wealthy, but how do we handle and how do we raise and how do we nourish financial expectations within the home, the body of Christ and society at large? I think we've got to revise this.
Well, talking of money, and we're running out of time, we were talking about the American elections, Republican primaries last week, and last night we had the result from Florida. I wasn't there. I knew that the guy that I was following, Santorum, and we had the interview last week. You can see that online at www.thepoliticsprogram.co.uk if you missed it last week. But Mitt Romney spent $16 million and, surprise, surprise, won the day. So it's down to money, is it? Is it really true that in American politics, and much of that money was spent on negative advertising, is it really true that in American politics, and maybe even here, that it's money first and negative advertising works?
Advertising certainly works.
And that's why we don't have it here. Is that a good thing, that we don't have?
We do have advertising, but we actually have quite tight caps on the amount that parties and individuals are allowed to spend. And yes, I'm entirely in favour of that.
So were you surprised at Romney, and is Romney going to buy the White House or buy the nomination?
Romney, I think, will get the nomination on current trends, but if he doesn't get a good coalition of Republicans around him, he won't carry his Conservative base and he will be humiliated.
So this is a different take from the blogger we had last week, Reza, who says he thinks that Santorum will come through the middle.
I'm not saying he won't, that Santorum couldn't. I'm just saying that I think that Romney on current grounds probably will.
Okay. Have you guys been watching the American?
No, I haven't, not at all. I've got enough getting my head down of what's happening here in the UK.
Okay, Brian, have you been watching that scene? Any comment in the last minute of the show? And I've got one email that I want to read before we finish.
Little bits, and I don't understand the whole process of the American politics, but it certainly does seem that their campaigning strategy is, based on the advertising, the strength of your packet, and very little about really convinced by policy.
Well, okay, well, in the last minute of the show, I do want to carry a message forward to our viewers, and that's a request for more prayer particularly for Bella Santorum. The little baby Bella, Rick Santorum's daughter, rushed to hospital over the weekend, was close to death, but the Lord were gracious and she came through it. But do pray for them, quite apart from where your politics are. This is a wonderful baby girl. In the last 30 seconds, I got an email from Margaret Salmond. I don't know whether she's any relation. The Union of the Parliaments came about because Scottish politicians were bribed with money from England. Corruption, says Margaret. I've got to say, it's been a great show. Thank you, Brian, David, Ron. This has been the Politics Programme. My name's George Hargreaves. Thanks for being with us. See you next week. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.